It was almost 2 a.m. on Saturday, January 3rd, when the people of Caracas who were still awake saw the electricity suddenly go out in the capital of Venezuela. Within minutes, in the midst of the darkness, explosions began to sound from a roar never before heard by those people of Caracas. The armed forces of the United States of America were bombing the city of Caracas. It was a military operation with a level of significance, technology, and impact unparalleled in world history. An operation by the government of Donald Trump with the unprecedented goal of capturing, kidnapping, or detaining on Venezuelan soil the sitting head of state of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro Mora. Join me to learn in the most objective and neutral way how this military and political operation, unique in its kind in history, unfolded, as well as the most relevant events that followed. This is Reynaldo Jose Carrillo Vilches speaking. This is the New Encyclopedia, and I invite you to give us great support by liking this video, leaving your comments, we always read them all, and hitting the bell for notifications. Of course, by subscribing to the channel and sharing it with all your friends on social media, on WhatsApp, and anywhere else. Without further ado, let's start with today's story. The governments of Venezuela and the United States have had an ambivalent and complex relationship for more than 2 centuries. The relationship that forms between an imperial hegemon that has become the world's leading power and a much smaller yet dynamic nation, rich in resources and with the largest oil reserves in the world. In the 21st century, the relationships between Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, with the administrations of George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, went through different periods, both of cooperation and understanding, as well as of conflict and hostilities. Amid this game of economic and geopolitical interests, political alliances, intrigues, and pressure groups, since 2025, Donald Trump's team has escalated this conflict with Nicolas Maduro's administration, taking it to levels never seen before, back in the days of Juan Guaido in 2019. In 2019, the United States under Donald Trump's first term not only recognized a different government from the Chavista government, but also tightened various types of sanctions and trade blockades against Venezuela's political and military leaders and the entire economy, already making military threats in that year 2019 towards the Venezuelan administration. And since the beginning of his second term in January 2020, the government of Donald Trump not only raises its rhetoric and its sanctions measures against Venezuela of Maduro, but also in the middle of that year, the United States Armed Forces began moving troops, ships, aircraft carriers, planes, bombers, and other military equipment in the Caribbean. In addition to the bombing during those months, more than 20 boats in the Caribbean with civilians who were allegedly transporting narcotics. They consolidated a military, maritime, and air blockade of Venezuelan territory, all in the midst of a systematic media campaign about an impending military invasion of Venezuela. During these years, but especially in 2025, the United States government has argued that Venezuela and its government are an alleged threat to United States national security. They have claimed that Maduro is an illegitimate dictator who allegedly sent the infamous Tren de Aragua and other criminal gangs to commit crimes in North America, and that he is allegedly the leader of a drug cartel that would send drugs north to poison the American people. Just as they have argued that Venezuela has strengthened ties with countries like Cuba, Iran, Russia, and China, and others that would be contrary to American interests. The Venezuelan government claims Venezuela is free and strong, the side of and conduct its relations with other countries, in the way it sees fit. The United States as an empire is using force to protect its interests in the Americas and secure Venezuela's resources. And it has been claimed that the Cartel of the Suns and the Aragua Train have been exaggerated narratives to justify their interventionism in Venezuela. This is a conflict that requires much more depth and context. The truth is that after several months of these intense hostilities and tensions, very few people could have imagined what was about to happen. The early morning of January 3rd, 2026, several details and facts remain unclear and may never be clarified. But based on the statements and information provided so far, the following is estimated. For months, what would later be called Operation Absolute Resolution was being planned, with official approval given from the operations room, with Marco Rubio, Secretary of State Peter Hexalt, Secretary of War, and CIA head John Rachtophel at his Mar-a-Lago residence. For the operation, more than 150 aircraft of the highest technological level were prepared and would be used once the order was given. They depart from more than 20 air and naval bases in different locations. Puerto Rico, New York, the aircraft carrier United States ship, Gerald Ford, positioned in the Caribbean Sea, as well as other bases in Nevada, Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and others. As 2 a.m. approaches, the American aircraft take off. Among the aircraft taking off are 5th-generation F-22 Raptor fighters and F-35 fighters for air superiority and radar neutralization, F-18 Super Hornet fighters for tactical air support, B-1 bombers to attack infrastructure, EA-18, G electronic warfare aircraft for radar jamming and other functions, as well as various drones and helicopters, Night Stalkers, both Chinook and Black Hawk types, carrying agents from the famous Delta Force of the United States Army Special Operations, assigned with the mission to capture the head of state of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, in Venezuela. It was the early morning of a recently arrived Friday. It was New Year's. Many were sleeping, but many were still awake. The atmosphere was festive and restful, and no one, or almost no one, could imagine what was about to happen. Are these Night Stalkers combat helicopters the first to mobilize? They take off before 2 a.m. on Saturday, January 3rd, flying at just 30 meters above sea level, over the Caribbean Sea, approaching the Venezuelan coast. But before these helicopters enter Caracas, they will be backed up by fighters and bombers. First, through electronic warfare aircraft, they would have blocked and neutralized the sensors of the main radars of the Venezuelan Armed Forces defense system. From the north of the nation, at 2 a.m., the first bombings begin simultaneously on strategic points in Venezuela. On one hand, projectiles, missiles, and/or bombs hit and disable electrical substations, such as the Santa Teresa substation in Miranda, a key electrical station in that area, which, combined with cyber attacks and desaturation through the use of microwaves, caused part of Caracas's electrical system to collapse, leaving the residents without power, who immediately began to hear the explosions. Simultaneously, projectiles, missiles, and/or bombs strike and disable the anti-air defense system at the country's main military bases. La Carlota Airport in Caracas, Fuerte Tuna in Caracas, and Igoroti Airport in Miranda State. There, BUC missile carriers, M2E, and mobile radars of the Venezuelan army are destroyed, as well as other points within those military facilities. At the same time as all this, during those same minutes, the United States Armed Forces also bombed the El Volcan Hill, where several telecommunications antennas that were key in that area were located and are destroyed. At the same time, in parallel, the port of La Guaira and the naval base of Meseta de Mimo, also in La Guaira, are bombed. Just as projectiles are fired at the vicinity of the Cuartel de la Montaña and some areas of Charalave, Baruta, and El Atillo. These United States military attacks in Venezuela immediately leave about 8 civilian deaths who were outside military zones. Among them, Johanna Sierra, 45 years old, a resident of La Bolera, and Rosa Gonzalez, 80 years old, a resident of La Guaira, as well as several civilian homes in those areas, were destroyed. According to eyewitness accounts of guided and fast missiles and some photographs, 4 types of projectiles used during the operation have been identified. Hellfire air-to-ground missile 114 and air-to-ground missile 158 missiles, Hydra 70 rockets, and JDAM guided bomb unit 3138 bombs. But while all this was happening, the main mission, which was the capture, kidnapping, or detention of President Nicolas Maduro, was underway. Once key points of the main military base in the country, Fuerte Tiuna, were attacked in the darkness. Approximately 10 Night Stalker helicopters carrying Delta Force Special Operations agents were already flying over Caracas. At the height of the buildings, they suddenly burst in at 2:01 in the morning into the so-called Casa de los Pinos, a fortified residence of 15,000 square meters with 5 underground levels, where the presidential couple was supposed to be sleeping. At Fuerte Tiuna, the helicopters encounter resistance and fire from the Venezuelan army, but tactics such as the use of infrared systems or the highest technology incorporated into the Chinook helicopters would have thrown off the missiles fired at them. Then comes the combat at the residence with the honor guard and Maduro's security ring, which, according to the Cuban government itself, in addition to Venezuelan military personnel, would also be partly made up of more than 30 Cuban soldiers, members of the elite corps of the Cuban army, known as the Black Wasps. Helicopters. The security ring members would have been caught off guard in a coordinated move. Maduro's guard tries to repel the operation by firing at the helicopters, to which, according to General Duncan, the United States Army Delta Force responded with overwhelming force, which ended up taking the lives of the officers who were protecting the Venezuelan leader. After this, in a matter of seconds and minutes, the Delta Force soldiers reportedly forced and destroyed the steel doors of the fortification, using specialized tools and explosives, until they reached the presidential couple who were trying to take cover, with Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores being captured and taken to the helicopters, an operation that would have lasted approximately 3 minutes. Once in the helicopters, their trail suddenly disappears, but the bombings continue in Venezuela. It was just after 2 a.m., and as soon as the neighbors in the attacked areas found out, the rest of Venezuela and the world found out too. Through WhatsApp groups and news on social media, people were watching and commenting on the military operation almost live and direct, both inside and outside Venezuela. No one knew if this was an attack, a coup, an open invasion of Venezuela, or what exactly was happening. Finally, at around 3 in the morning, the last projectiles were heard on Venezuelan soil, and the American planes definitely left Venezuelan land and waters. During the attacks, in addition to the 8 civilians previously mentioned who died, around 50 soldiers of the Bolivarian armed forces were reportedly killed in combat, mainly in the attacks on Fuerte Tiuna, La Carlota, and Nicolas Maduro's honor guard. Likewise, the Cuban government reported that 32 soldiers of the Cuban army also died in this operation. A gray mist smelling of gunpowder covers the parishes of Caracas, giving way to a dense silence among the population, which would stretch out on the horizon for quite some time. They were hours of fear and uncertainty, but also of calm and sanity. The capital was without power and without phone signal. At 4 a.m, the first official statement was made. The Minister of Defense, Vladimir Pedrino Lopez, who has been Minister of Defense for more than 10 consecutive years, with Nicolas Maduro as president, he released a statement via Instagram in which he acknowledged the criminal military aggression by the United States and confirmed the bombings of the previously mentioned places. He does not offer or comment on any details about the whereabouts of Nicolas Maduro and Cilia Flores. What the public still didn't know is that at 4:29 in the morning, the Venezuelan presidential couple was arriving by helicopter at the United States ship Iwo Jima, positioned in international waters of the Caribbean. Just an hour later, at 5:29 in the morning, President Donald Trump made an announcement on the social network Truth that indeed Nicolas Maduro and Cilia Flores had been captured by the United States government. After this, at 6:15 in the morning Venezuela time, Marco Rubio confirmed through the social network X that Maduro and Cilia Flores were in federal custody to face charges for, quote, narco-terrorism at 6 a.m. Venezuela time. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, a lawyer from Caracas, with several years of experience as Maduro's foreign minister and vice president. She's also the sister of another key figure in the Chavista coalition, the National Assembly president and Caracas psychiatrist, who has held major roles since Chavismo began. Her brother Jorge Rodriguez appears on the state television channel Publica BTV to deliver a message to the nation demanding proof of life from the presidential couple. Then, at 6:36 in the morning, the Minister of Interior Relations, Justice and Peace, Diosdado Cabello, a military captain, and the other major influential figure in the government since the beginnings of Chavismo, goes out into the streets of Caracas to call for the defense of sovereignty, and he acknowledges that the objectives of the American bombings were, quote, partially achieved. As dawn breaks in Venezuela, at 7:12 in the morning, President Donald Trump releases a photo of Maduro captured wearing hearing protection and tactical glasses, in addition to a Nike tracksuit that is still being talked about to this day. The image quickly goes around the world and provokes both condemnation and celebration from political leaders and thousands of people worldwide. It seemed to be the final confirmation for those who remained skeptical during that Saturday morning, January 3rd. Delcy Rodriguez immediately calls for the National Defense Council, and it is held together with the Council of Ministers in Caracas, presided over by the Vice President of the Republic, Delcy Rodriguez. Together, and in the public presence of all the most prominent leaders of the national executive, alongside the military and political high command. Delcy Rodriguez calls for peace, condemns the kidnapping of Maduro, and reaffirms him as the only true president of Venezuela. At the same time, Delcy enacts the so-called Decree of External Commotion, which grants her broad powers to confront what is considered an external or internal threat. Meanwhile, Nicolas Maduro and Cilia Flores lie in Guantanamo Bay, where they are handed over to Drug Enforcement Administration and FBI agents for their subsequent transfer to New York. In the midst of this, at noon, President Donald Trump gives official statements to the press about the operation called Absolute Resolution. He appears alongside Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of War Peter Hegseth. At the press conference, Donald Trump confirms it, signing for the first time with his own voice and face what is called the capture of Nicolas Maduro to be prosecuted in United States institutions. It is the definitive confirmation for the whole world. Trump tells the press that this operation seeks to safeguard the interests of the United States and says they are going to govern Venezuela for an indefinite period and manage its oil industry. I quote Trump's words, "We are going to administer Venezuela until a proper transition can take place. We are going to administer and rebuild the oil industry, which will cost billions of dollars that will be reimbursed to us with future profits." End of quote. Likewise, Donald Trump, in the press conference, states that the person in Venezuela with whom the United States is in talks is Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, with whom they hope to lead a new process. And he also adds that they are ready to carry out a second attack on Venezuela, much larger, if necessary. Donald Trump, in turn, in this press conference, and to the surprise of many, speaks in very harsh terms about the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, stating that he has not had contact with her, and I quote, "It would be very difficult for her to be the leader since she doesn't have the support or respect within the country." He also doesn't speak well of Edmundo Gonzalez. Hours later, Marco Rubio said on Fox News that Edmundo Gonzalez was not a legitimate president either, because the Venezuelan presidential elections in general had been illegitimate. This stance was maintained both by Donald Trump and other Republican representatives, with Donald Trump reaffirming it in that first press conference. Who is Delcy Rodriguez, whom they see as the main figure in Venezuela, with whom they are seeking to reach an understanding in this new stage? Meanwhile, the situation in Venezuela is tense but stable. During that Saturday when the bombing happened, there are no military uprisings or signs of institutional breakdown, no civilian demonstrations, no public celebration or condemnation. The police remain at their posts and telecommunications and basic services continue nationwide without interruption. Several cities even continued in complete normalcy in some parts of Venezuela, such as its main cities. Supporters of the government organized public demonstrations and gatherings of popular, military, and police forces in each state. Meanwhile, in many other parts of the main cities of the country, most businesses do not open, and the vast majority of people stay at home. In the afternoon, Maduro and Cilia arrive at the Newburgh Air Base in the state of New York, where Maduro is seen handcuffed and wearing a blue pullover, black pants, and slippers. At 5 in the afternoon, they are taken to the Drug Enforcement Administration office in Manhattan for their formal processing at that location. When they get out of the vehicle, they are recorded entering the building. Maduro at first looks in pain, but then with a smile he greets several of those present and wishes them good night and Happy New Year in English. He was even photographed with several Drug Enforcement Administration agents, smiling and giving a thumbs up after his arrival at the Drug Enforcement Administration. Maduro and Cilia, already at night, are transferred to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, where they will reside throughout the judicial process, back in Venezuela at 11:04 p.m. on the same Saturday as the bombing, January 3rd. The Constitutional Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice proclaims Vice President Delcy Rodriguez as acting president of Venezuela due to Maduro's temporary absence. And the Supreme Court, in turn, it confirms that the United States violated Venezuelan sovereignty, has kidnapped President Maduro, and that he must be returned to Venezuela. This proclamation and the actions and statements of both governments in the days following the military operation have confirmed the continuation of the Chavista state and government, with the same actors in power and with Delcy Rodriguez as the new president, officially recognized as an interlocutor by the White House. At the same time, Maria Corina's opposition is not taken into account by Washington. But going back to the chronology of events, Sunday, January 4th, arrives in the Caribbean homeland, and the tense calm of the previous day continues. Inside Venezuela, the government holds public demonstrations, with its supporters demanding the return of Nicolás Maduro and Cilia Flores to Venezuela. During the day, a council of ministers is held, attended by Diosdado Cabello and all the top officials of the executive, reaffirming for one more day the unity of the governing coalition. The council is presided over by Delcy Rodriguez, who, after the meeting at night, sends a message through her social media inviting the United States to a relationship of cooperation, working in peace and mutual prosperity. January 5th arrives 2 days after the military operation, and it turns out to be a very busy day in Venezuela. In the morning, as scheduled, the new National Assembly is installed for the 2026 to 2031 term, and it's Jorge Rodriguez, brother of the new president, Delcy Rodriguez, who is re-elected as president of this legislative body for the new 2026-2027 term. Once the new assembly is installed, its first act is to swear in Delcy Rodriguez Gomez as acting president of Venezuela, reaffirming once again the institutional continuity in Venezuela, and the absence of disruptions. Even though more than 2 days ago the first head of state had been captured, at this very moment the press asks Donald Trump if he plans to hold elections in Venezuela and release the political prisoners, to which he responds that the priority is to stabilize and recover the oil, that later they could take care of other things, and that now they are the ones managing Venezuela. It's uncertain, since the institutional and on-the-ground control of Venezuela is still directly in the hands of the Chavista government. Meanwhile, in the United States at 11 in the morning, Maduro and Cilia attend the first hearing at the federal court of the Southern District of New York. At the same hearing, Maduro comes in again, smiling and greeting everyone, wishing them a happy new year and good morning. During the hearing, he looked around and made eye contact with everyone in the room and was constantly taking notes. This preliminary hearing is only intended to make the formal accusation and to find out how the defendants plead guilty or not guilty. Judge Alvin Hellerstein presides and reads the charges against each person. In the indictment, Maduro is charged with conspiracy for narco-terrorism, conspiracy to import cocaine, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. Cilia is charged with the same offenses, except for conspiracy for narco-terrorism. Maduro and Cilia are represented by attorneys Barry Pollock, who is famous for having represented Julian Assange in his high-profile case, and Mark Donnelly, who specializes in financial crimes. Minutes after Maduro entered the hearing with his feet shackled in a room full of witnesses and journalists, the judge arrives, and as the first procedural step to begin the proceedings, he asks him if he is Nicolás Maduro to verify his identity, to which he responds, "I am Nicolás Maduro Moros, President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. I am still the president of my country. I am here, kidnapped since January 3rd, as the translator translated." The United States judge tells Maduro that it was only necessary for him to confirm his identity, to which Maduro responds, "Yes, I am the president of Venezuela. I was captured in my house in Caracas in an illegal military intervention. I consider myself a prisoner of war, and I adhere to the Geneva Conventions." End quote. Both Maduro and Cilia declare themselves not guilty and innocent at the end of this preliminary hearing. A Venezuelan among the witnesses stands up and shouts at Maduro, "You are a criminal, and you will pay for your crimes against the Venezuelan people." Maduro turns around, looks at him, and responds loudly, "I am the president of Venezuela, and by God, you will see me walk free." Judge Alvin Hellerstein set the next hearing for March 17, where, during the process, evidence must continue to be submitted and the corresponding defenses for each case must be presented. A trial that could last at least until the year 2027. 6 days after the bombing of the capital of Venezuela by the United States Army, and the capture of its head of state along with his wife, an unprecedented operation in military history, The Venezuelan nation has had no social or political ruptures. Delcy Rodriguez has been recognized by all branches of power. The Venezuelan state and civil society have continued their activities, and the political and military high command has remained unified. And various spokespersons in the United States have not only recognized Delcy Rodriguez as the interlocutor with whom they intend to carry out this new process, but they have also stated, as Donald Trump and Marco Rubio themselves have said, that the priority for now in Venezuela is not elections or a transition, but in their own words, first, a stabilization process and then a recovery process, in addition to the institutional continuity of the Chavista government, which has remained since the attacks. There appears to have been a significant shift in the relationship between the United States and Venezuela. The United States, after this military attack and also taking advantage of the military blockade of Venezuelan oil trade, has openly raised the banners of the Monroe Doctrine, and the leaders of the government have not only made statements but have also taken concrete steps so that the major United States oil companies regain prominence, if not control, over the Venezuelan oil industry. Added to this is the announcement of new treaties that will reportedly require Venezuela to import most or all products from the United States. This is a story still unfolding. Nothing will ever be the same for Venezuelans after this January 3rd, nor for those who, from inside or outside the country, were finding out about everything, and even less for those who, in Caracas, La Guaira, or Higuerote, heard the roar of missiles and bombs falling. An event that has produced the strongest emotions. An event that will leave wounds and marks forever in the national consciousness. And that opens a new stage where nothing can be ruled out, but that many hope can bring the best for Venezuela. Thank you all for watching this video and for your great support by leaving your comments, giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, sharing the video with all your friends, and clicking the bell to activate notifications. This is Reynaldo Jose Carrillo Vilches for the New Encyclopedia. Thank you for your support and blessings to all.